Hey guys, welcome to the conversation. So today I'm going to be sharing with you the first episode of my show. This could be interesting. And in it, we take some time to try to figure out what a conversation is. I sit down with a couple of my best friends, Andrew, Connor, my brother Evan. The thing about it is I'm still not sure, along with a couple of the other episodes I've already recorded, whether or not it's boring or not, which I'm kind of afraid of. But I don't know. After sitting on this episode and this conversation for about a week, a lot of the things that we talked about kept coming back to me. So I have a sense that maybe even if there's a bit to push through, there's something meaningful that happened here. But you might be looking at the title of the channel and the video and thinking, what could be interesting? Well, I mean, that's kind of what the conversation was about. What makes an interesting conversation? I'm not going to spoil the whole conversation for you, but I do want to share a little bit of a thought I had that I wrote down. So you might think that the key to having an interesting conversation is to sit down with a friend and figure out some things you agree on. Well, that's probably a good start. I think the point of a conversation might actually be the opposite. I think the point of a conversation is actually to see how big of a disagreement you can manage to have while remaining open to future disagreements. You want to try to dig as deep as you can dig, find a problem, and try to destroy it without damaging the future of the relationship any more than necessary. Anyway, maybe that's not all there is to it, and I'm pretty sure that that's not all there is to it, but that's kind of the point of the show, is to keep working on that problem. Part of my strategy for working on that problem is just having these kinds of meta conversations, talking about conversations. But the other side of it is I want to try to practice doing that and sit down with some people and have some maybe difficult disagreements, but use that as a tool for uncovering something useful. All that said, welcome to episode 0, where we try to figure out what a conversation is. This could be interesting. Okay, so did any of you guys actually, I asked if you wanted to kind of make any notes about thinking about
we were supposed
conversation.
to make notes?
I don't know, you didn't have to take notes. I figured if this is like podcast club, then that means it's like take notes.
I thought you were going to really lead us.
I know, I was planning on it.
Just tell us what this means to you.
Yeah, I guess that's all. Really, I just got to say some stuff and then you got to tell me why it's wrong. Maybe that's the point that I'm going to rest on it in the end, is that's all that a conversation is just you saying stuff and then other people telling you why it's wrong. So maybe that's a good place to start. But I wanted to try to figure out, for one thing, well, maybe I guess where I want to go maybe is to figure out what's the point of a podcast, or how can it be useful? But underneath that question is what is a conversation? Why? I don't know. I guess that's a really kind of dumb philosophically way of thinking about it. It's not necessarily a question that leads that much of anywhere, but I want to try and figure it out anyways. What is a conversation? Why? I don't know. I thought about that a lot growing up, maybe, I guess. Just why is it that you want to talk to people? Why do you do that? It's like an instinctual thing that you decide, I'm going to go talk to somebody. Why? I on one level, it's just, I guess you usually do it because you have an idea or because you want information. But I feel like you do it beyond that. It's just a pattern of that's a behavior that everybody engages in, not because they can rationalize it that much. It's just I need to go and talk to somebody.
Yeah. Well, so the networking to share information has been socially or just evolutionarily advantageous so much that we have an innate desire for it.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So you go and you. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of almost like a religious practice. It's okay, I don't have to think about why this is good. I just have kind of a core belief that doing this is good, whether or not I would even say it that way or not. It's my actions prove that for some reason I think this is a good thing to do. And it's kind of obvious that it ends up making something useful. It refines something.
Your experience proves that.
Well, you can think of it in the same way as sex, where it has a good evolutionary end, but it doesn't always have to meet that. Where you could have like bad conversation.
That's a good point too. Yeah. So it's an instinctual urge, but like the urge in itself doesn't necessarily lead to something useful.
And it's enjoyable because it usually is.
It's supposed to be a. That's a good point. But so
I don't know if we want to bother fleshing that out.
No, I just think that
exactly agree. But
well,
we just touched on like 4 things, and then we're just continuing to open up more rabbit holes.
well, I think that's maybe the way you start a conversation is you touch on a couple of different things.
Well, does everyone agree that conversations are just like in some way advantageous? Like
Yeah, I mean, that's
right, okay. I love that doing this right now because it's so meta.
Well, quite honestly, I don't think that. So I'm gonna leave.
Disagree. That's why I stayed home.
You actually can't. You can't disagree with that if you're here.
For some reason, you came here.
No, because you could be in a.
You're here to protest.
Well, as we talked about earlier, your beliefs you could be acting in a way that doesn't align with what you're like intellectually believe.
No one voluntarily showed up to do to disagree.
Well, okay, but disagreement is like fundamentally part of conversation, though.
Well,
so as soon as you start, like the only reason that you say something back to somebody is to kind of counter it a little bit or buffet it or like
Yeah.
Like it's literally
the only way you say anything meaningful. I mean, not usually, because either you're trying to understand it better yourself, or you're trying to change their mind or change your own. Like you're trying to change someone's mind by repeating it. Like if you agree, you might be just trying to change your own mind on it by saying it, because like saying something aloud is convincing yourself.
Sort of, yeah. Okay, well, we were talking earlier about just the concept of belief, because that's a pretty deep hole to dive into, because like, so I mean, Jordan Pierce's position is just like your belief is revealed by your actions.
Yeah. If you act it, you believe it. So,
but it's like that's one way of defining it.
I'm not taking that as a definitional stance. I'm taking it as like a principled stance. Like if you disbelieve something, you shouldn't act it out because it's dishonest with yourself.
Yeah, you should try to align yourself to be not at odds. You should at the very least not be at odds with yourself. And then you can deal with the rest later. But like you should try to do things that you think that you should do.
Yeah.
But that's like not a low bar.
Right.
Because none of us, and I guess I shouldn't say that you should start there, because you should lower the dissonance inside yourself enough so that then you can engage with the world. Like if I had too much conflict, I guess just conflict inside of me, that's what would prevent me from
that Freudian repression practice of just like taking the things that are inside of you and laying them out there. It's like any idea that hasn't been said yet is in a really loose way sort of repressed, or it like hasn't been put out into action yet. I think that may be part of what talking or having a conversation is about.
Oh yeah. Okay. So you just brought to mind something really important about conversation. Like how many times has someone said, I've never said that out loud before. It sounds really stupid now that I said it out loud. Right. But like,
right.
And then like, I remember saying that and having thought that thing for a long time, but then when you say it out loud, it's like, wait, that doesn't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to quote Kanye West, people say, don't say this, don't say that. Just say it out loud. See how it feels.
Say it out loud. See how it feels.
And that's why I think Harriet Tubman didn't free the slave. Wait.
He was riffing on that. Say it out loud. See how it feels. But that's true. It's like sometimes... And it's like before you've said it out loud, all it is a feeling anyways. But then for some reason, there's like a feeling response once you've manifested that idea and turned it into like a more specific thing.
And that's why speech has to be free. Because if you couldn't just say stuff to see, then you wouldn't really be able to know anything.
Well, if you're not free to say like anything, then you're not able to be honest with yourself because you can't express what you actually believe or you think you believe.
Right. But I think, I want to get off free speech in a second because I don't think that's where
Sure.
the core of, well, we can talk about whatever we want to, but I don't think that
like
the free speech
restricting
thing
speech.
is, yeah, I'm saying I think that speech should be restricted. It's just that it shouldn't be, it's just, I don't think that one person should be responsible for restricting speech.
Well, I mean,
I
everyone
think every
restricts-
individual and every group
Yeah.
should all restrict speech on the level that it affects them.
Well, I think
to
free is, I'd say, I mean it more in an association with like cost. Like we should try to reduce the cost of people to say things in certain scenarios. Obviously, there's high cost scenarios for speaking. Like speech, not all speech is equal in cost. And I guess it should never be free in terms of there should never be no cost. But generally, we need a subsidy on the cost of speaking because it can easily become
Can you
too
define those terms
costly.
A
better?
subsidy on
I
the
feel like
cost
you
of
mean
speaking?
weight, like the value of the speech, or
Well, I'm using like free in like a
Okay.
yeah, I'm
You're
kind of
trying to go
using
to
it as an
economic terms.
analogy
Yeah.
Yeah, I
for
know.
economics
Right.
in speech where like
Right. Okay, so
like
there needs to
the
be a weight.
cost like because there certainly is a cost to saying things because that's what led to a lot of atrocities are propaganda and basically speech can lead to
Right. Okay.
horrible things but the cost I don't know at some point needs to be subsidized because
Well, because you're responsible for what you say, and sometimes I guess it can be sort of, you can be afraid of saying what you think. So you're saying it needs to be subsidized, and it needs to be encouraged to say what you think, because it's worth getting some ideas out there. It's worth, I mean, I think that's just sort of a responsive principle. It's just like, usually you should feel free to say what you want to think, or say what you want to say. It's just that if like you're existing in a cultural story that's like at a point where there's been too much bad speech or something like that, and they're kind of tamping down on speech, then you need to kind of say, no, you should speak. And so then you want to you're saying you want to subsidize that. That's sort of a response to a particular moment in a particular system's story.
I don't know exactly what you mean by subsidize in that
in-
analogy, because I understand that it's healthy to have an outlet to express your ideas. I think we all agree on that. Like, so that you have a space to be wrong and say something egregious and not be like destroyed for it, not have a huge negative consequence for expressing what you honestly believe. So it's healthy to have such a space, but I don't know what you mean by subsidize, like promote people being able to do that, or
encourage them to do it.
yeah I think just not bill people for the results of their speech beyond itself, right? So it's like with like the riots on the Capitol. It's like so many people's words are people are basically billing them for the damage at the Capitol being the result of lots of different people's words, right? Like AOC says that Ted Cruz tried to have her killed.
What?
Yeah,
I haven't heard this
AOC.
story yet.
I don't. You know who AOC
Yeah,
is?
okay, yeah.
She's
She
claiming
plays
that
Among
Ted
Us.
Cruz
She plays
tried
Among
to
Us.
have her
She's
killed.
that Among Us star,
She's a
right?
streamer.
Yeah,
She's a streamer. Okay.
yeah, you should know her. She's super cool.
She's really good.
She
at
also
it,
does
actually.
politics sometimes.
She
So.
also does politics.
like accusing other politicians of attempted murder. Those type of political endeavors. Anyway, I think that like that's obviously she needs to. And maybe it was a result of it, but like I don't know if we should act like that. We need to like sort of subsidize that. We can't necessarily let individuals shoulder the cost all the way. Right. But maybe, like I said, there is situations. So maybe I
think to some extent every group
I don't
does
think that's
that.
necessarily even appropriate for the context we were just speaking about, because we were talking about honest expression. That is a dishonest interpretation of things that were said. Like that's
Right.
a whole other conversation.
But because speech is always interpreted, though, and that's the point. Is that like so?
Yeah,
as soon
but
as you
honestly
speak,
or dishonestly.
sure,
right?
but I mean,
So that's the difference.
But how do you measure that?
Like we all understand what the language. Okay, so there's a thing happening where some people are deciding words mean different things, and then it's not even possible to follow because it's hypocritical. It's not applied the same way across the board.
Okay, so this is actually unless you have like a big thing you want to do with that is a perfect kind of lead into what the thoughts I really had about conversation that I was wanting to kind of flesh out with you guys, which is that I think that conversation doesn't work in that scenario. I don't think conversation works when you have...
No, that's not a conversation.
Right. It maybe it can be if there's some feedback a little bit, but I think...
That's like verbal warfare.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think that a conversation can include some warfare, can include some debate, some argument, but we can get into all like the definitions of those things in a sec if we want. But I think that every time, especially like that adjective conversational, like that kind of gives there's a little bit of an emotional. I kind of know what that is. Like conversational is like you sit down with somebody and it's conversational because you start talking, and like, what are you doing when you're doing that? When you're having a conversational conversation,
yeah,
I think that's
it's exactly not like Steven Crowder does, because those are very argumentative.
Yeah, those are extremely point. And so he's really trying to do something, and he's a little bit too, I think it's like that still is a conversation, but he's a little bit too dead set on doing something that he wants to do.
Well,
like
you need to, I guess, export and import information in balance.
Right.
And he's out there generally
Just
with the
spouting
intention
ideas.
to export information.
Yeah.
But his sign says, "I'm trying to import information.
Yeah.
Come offload information to me." And then you sit down, and he's like, "Well, now I can."
I don't think he's the right person to do it either.
Yeah. Like, I like the idea of his little sign that says, like, I don't even remember what it says. Change my mind. It's like he literally is not asking people to change his mind. He's never changed his mind. He's dead set on his ideas, and he wants to change your mind. It's totally dishonest, like 100% dishonest. So I like the idea of the show, but I think it's a really shitty show.
You think it should be called Change Your Mind?
Yeah, change your mind because you're wrong. I'm Steven Crowder, and I'm right.
Yeah, well, and he's
It is funny
it's
though.
in detail and in the broad picture. Like he's out there while they're filming, trying to export his ideas, and then he films it, puts it on the internet so he can export his ideas even further. Like the whole model is just to export his ideas.
And sometimes there's an inadvertent, like he accidentally exports better ideas than his own and proves that he's making a bad point by just there being some good conversation. But I think usually those conversations tend to go south because people are kind of identifying him as like I don't know, some argumentational guy who wants to go and just cause drama.
That's kind of what I meant with he's the wrong person for it. I just don't think he has the right demeanor for talking to people gently.
Right. Well, so, okay, Evan and I talked briefly about this, about the idea of the yes and principle. That's like that's what's Improv 101. Like that's basically the bottom of like, this is how you form something together. It's how you build a scene together. And I think that's kind of what you're doing when you have a conversation with somebody, especially if you don't know them very well too, is that you're trying to build a bit of a bridge of commonality. I was thinking about it in terms of like you're building a room, and you figure out how big that room is with every statement you guys make. And you only push back if it's like, no, that those terms are not ones that I want to get behind. Or like, it's like you've said something that's a little bit too far out of, because to some extent, everything that you say, everybody could push back a little bit on it just for no reason and try to make you explain it in more detail or something like that. But like, you kind of you build a little bit of room of some general ideas, and then you keep on talking until there's something that says, well, let me push you back there, or here's my thoughts on that. Like, you start the response at the disagreement, but you try to build some place of agreement first, because until there's a common room for you to meet in, there's no changing each other's mind, or there's no, good faith exchange of ideas. You have to kind of, to some extent, figure out to what extent you're on the same team, or you're the same group, the same family. You're smiling. You got an idea?
I was listening to Bad Friends earlier, and they were talking about improv, and they're trying to teach
Rudy.
Yeah, and it's like, you can't say anything wrong. There's no wrong answers.
I know, she's trying to answer all their questions. Like, they're asking her just like history questions. She's trying to answer them all correctly, but she needs to answer all of them incorrectly. right? That
like
should be, that would
improv
be
is
the
just
best.
like keep
yeah.
going, don't stop.
Mhm.
And I was trying to see how far the idea of improv in comedy still applies to the yes and principle you're using in regular conversation.
Well, so the yes and principle, I think, only is the principle for establishing something. So it's for building a place to have a conversation in, and that's like, so the fundamental. It's for building a premise, because you can't your premise can't be that you disagree. If it is, you immediately just sideline that and say, okay, well, where can we start? As soon as you have a disagreement with somebody, you try to figure out where your common ground is anyways. So you discard that disagreement anyways.
Isn't that where you start then?
With the disagreement?
Yeah. Well, it's easiest to find out what you both don't like. I mean, even pre-conversation, there's communication about what's not going to happen, right? Like, I'm not going to immediately attack you, and you sort of
But that's agreement.
signal that.
That's agreement.
It's agreement about what's like not going to happen.
Right. But I'm saying that you, like, if there's things that you both, okay, and this is kind of abstract, if there's things that you both want to happen that are not in agreement, you don't start there. You figure out, because if one of you is actually going to change the other person's mind and kind of hammer their ideas down into something that is more useful or more truthful, then
Are you saying you shouldn't start there? Because I think you probably do start there.
That's what
Like,
makes
if you
you
both want to
interested.
do something. No, it's not that what makes it interesting. You're saying they should. An interesting conversation should start where there's disagreement, is what you're proposing.
No, I'm saying that an interesting conversation should start with agreement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm saying that you
And then-
have
well,
to start
sure.
by building a mutual room for you to have a
Sure.
conversation
I
and
think
to exchange ideas.
You're
in.
using interesting in there, and it needs to. That's what's throwing it off, because actually conversation starts being interesting at disagreement.
Right.
Whereas
And
the
so-
conversation starts at agreement, and then
Right.
it becomes interesting when you hit the disagreement.
True. Okay.
Yeah, I think
There's-
you said conversation, and I inserted the word interesting because I was trying to understand what you meant.
Yeah, and I think that's what sort of uncovered that for me, was when you said interest, because I think really that's what we're getting at is there's the rest is just sort of playing through basically a script, right? That's the psychological idea that contrasts the idea that you were talking about, improv, right? So at some, like, when we're not having conversations, we are basically just running scripts. That's the what they call the psychological
what do you mean?
idea.
What's the running scripts? You're saying like
you're scripting is what it's called when you're basically having the conversation in your head, right? And then generally when you start having the conversation, you run that script until you get off the script, and then if you're a good conversationalist, you don't panic, you improv.
right. Oh yeah, true,
And that's going to be at the
Okay, yeah,
disagreement.
so I'm
that's where
sure
your script wasn't the same
people who
as
are
my
very
script.
introverted growing up could understand, like, a conversation not going on to plan, and planning a conversation beforehand, and then it just never works. And so, like, you talked about at the start about conversation being good experiences, like it's proven to be useful. Well, for a lot of people who are very shut in, like once you're past your 20s and you're still very introverted, you've probably had a lot of bad conversation experience, like just very awkward communication in general. And so that creates a negative feedback loop. Like, you're just not good at conversation at that point.
Yeah. And that's another interesting thing. It's just like, I don't think until maybe a little bit recently, thought of conversations being something that, like, that's a skill that you have to actively learn how to do well. Because it's like improving, but it's not just, I mean, to have a conversation that is useful, you have to get past the improv thing too. You have to learn how to disagree in such a way that doesn't just, because one of the bad experience things, like, why is a conversation considered a bad conversation, or like, why do you not want to have a conversation, is because somebody shut you down in such a way that you felt not comfortable to share any more ideas. You wanted to leave, or you wanted to stop that conversation and maybe not ever have a conversation with that person again, or anytime soon. It's like, so they destroyed the room, they burned the house down. So learning how to, like, as we said, the only way a conversation gets interesting is disagreeing, but that's also the dangerous point, because that's where you light a match, and is this match going to bring a little bit heat and warmth to this house, or are we going to burn it down? So how do you Well, this maybe goes into, because we talked a little bit about this with Jared, and that's going to come up eventually. The idea of stakes. That, like, when you have a disagreement with somebody, if they feel like the friendship is on the line, like, I mean, I definitely have had that experience with certain friends. Like, it's scary. It's like, I don't want to have a disagreement with you because I know that if we don't agree here, then that means I'm out. And so I don't want to have a disagreement with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, how do you make somebody comfortable enough to know that, hey,
that's on them. You can't make someone like that.
Well, I think I think that's what hospitality is. It's like inviting somebody into a space and saying, "Hey."
Yeah, you can make the situation better.
Right. So it's not totally in your control, but there's a sense to which you have to kind of. I mean, and a lot of it might be body language or like tone of voice, or choosing what dialect of English you want to speak. If you talk all technical language, like I notice when I'm talking to somebody who's really an intellectual. Even if I like fancy myself an intellectual, as soon as they start talking with really technical terms or like citing their sources, part of me wants to shut down because I'm like, crap, if I say something wrong, they're going to explain to me why I'm wrong. There's no grace to be wrong here because they know why I'm wrong somehow. Or it's just like a fear of intellectualism or like, yeah, something like that. I don't know. But so you have to be careful how you speak. You can signal that you're okay with, you can signal that it's okay to be wrong or okay to say something that you're not going to quite agree with in a lot of ways. I think smiling and I think yes ands are a great way to establish that. It's just that there's a key moment of like, you say no.
Yeah, but I think like what Andrew says is at some point, if the person is ideological, they associate themselves too heavily with whatever position you're disagreeing with for you to have a conversation about that. And so you like it kind of to me would get down to your definition of like a friend, like or like somebody, a conversation partner versus somebody you can just be like civil with. Right. So it's like you can still be around them, but you just now set a limit where they set
civility is like maybe even similar to friendliness, which is like the attribute of like making somebody feel as comfortable or like closer to that level of the comfortability of being a friend. Because with a friend, like the way we even have this rank ordering of like acquaintance or like associate and friend and like brother, even if it's somebody who's not flesh related, it's like you might call somebody like, that's my brother. It's like that's where you're at the level that there's literally basically nothing you can say that would make them reject you. But there's varying degrees before that where like, okay, we go to this far, and if you cross this line, then I reject you, or I reject your ideas. Or I don't even quite know how that works. How do you decide whether or not you reject somebody or reject their ideas? Because like, I mean, I guess on the surface level, when you're just starting a conversation with somebody, you're just figuring out whether or not you feel like investing enough time to have a longer conversation with them. So that the stakes are pretty, at least the vulnerability of that conversation or like the potential for it to just like the end of that relationship could be very sudden, because like if you just aren't saying things that are interesting to me, I might just go somewhere else. But like,
well, interesting, you mean like, whoa. Like, what do you...
It's like, okay, so interesting is probably that golden ratio of I agree with you about some ideas, but then you're saying some things that I haven't got to those conclusions. So why is that? But I don't feel like you're just totally nuts.
Well, that's exactly callback from earlier. Like, interesting conversation is where you start to disagree.
Right, exactly.
So if someone agrees with you too much, that's not going to be interesting, and you're not going to be friends. If someone disagrees too much, then that could be an amazing friendship. Or if they're too associated,
it's to do with how invested they are in a disagreed idea.
Mm-hmm.
So like you use the word ideological about something. So if someone is ideological about something, you can't convince them away from it, and there's really no interesting conversation to be had because you're talking to a wall.
Well,
they just think you're wrong.
I disagree. I think it could be interesting. I think the problem comes in when they take offense. So problem that I see...
That's what I mean when someone's ideological about something, is that they hold onto that idea so firmly they refuse to be convinced away from it.
Yeah, but that's not the problem. The problem for me is when they're offended that you disagree with it. I'm
I mean,
someone that
that's a step
holds on to
further, I
their
guess.
idea so heavily that they could never be convinced away. I want to gain information from them about
Right.
what they believe.
Yeah,
as
I
long
guess
as they
that's a
can
useful line.
withstand the whatever, it will require more force because of how associated with the idea they are. And if they can tolerate that force enough to have the conversation, I think that's still a really good conversation. But if they start becoming offended and hurt by the force that the conversation requires, then that's where it's going to stop working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's there really is a sense of just like you. I think I remember a long time ago there was a family friend that my parents liked to talk to his parents because they had a really hard time figuring out how to raise me because for some reason I was a complicated case for them. So, but
For whatever reason that was.
Ooh, no.
but this mutual friend, he was a bit older, so they were able to kind of consult his parents on like, well, what did you do with him during this time? Actually, it's funny. I could say who his name it is because we interviewed him already. This is Tyler.
Yeah, I figured.
So but something he told me when I was really much younger is that like, because I had a habit of, I guess, making inappropriate jokes. And I was like, I'm just trying to be funny. I'm just trying to have fun here. And he like basically just explained to me the principle of like, not everybody's going to think everything's funny, which should be pretty obvious for a lot of people. Apparently it wasn't for me, but he told me about this method he had of throwing out a test joke. It's like, it's not quite as edgy as the one he really wants to tell, but you can kind of feel out the crowd a little bit and see how edgy of memes can we throw around here. And that was a really good crutch for me to start walking on it as I learned how to have a conversation and how to tell jokes in a more appropriate way. Because, yeah, my problem growing up, and probably still to some extent, is very much just like not sensing when I've made people uncomfortable and just pushing things too far, whether it comes to humor or whether it comes to just a disagreement. Because, like, again, I'm interested in interesting conversations, and we already established that interesting conversations, like the interesting part is the disagreement. And like, I don't know, for some reason I really like.
Not always. I mean, just like expounding on information can be interesting as well.
True, okay, that's a good point.
But informative or disagreement can be interesting too.
But for some reason, like the emotion, like, so there's the idea, just learning things, that's exciting. I guess I really like that too. I don't know, but like there's something that's really
high. You're just trying to find
there is a
high.
huge emotional high for me that comes from like a good disagreement.
I mean,
It's like exciting.
Is that less of a conversation? Like the informational, like engagement is less of a conversation,
Right, that's
because it's
more
more
like
of
a
a
teaching.
question answer or just direct lecture.
Right. Yeah. I think that there probably should be a line there. Yeah. Because yeah, like when you're listening to a lecture or you're listening to somebody deliver a sermon or a teaching, that's not the same thing as a conversation.
Well, I guess you could be receiving, somebody doesn't agree with you, but they're giving you feedback on just the way you're expressing, or somebody agrees with you and they're giving you feedback on the way you're expressing it. But then I guess the disagreement is now located in the expression, not the topic. It's still a disagreement where you're learning how to flush out an idea, and you're not necessarily in disagreement with the other person, but it could be mutual. You're helping each other express it.
Right. Well, it's just that you don't get a chance to disagree with the person because the person never gets fully manifested in the phrases that they're saying. Like you only get to disagree about the ideas that have come out of their mouth. So like it doesn't, you never know whether or not you disagree with the person. You can only just play with the words that you're throwing at each other.
Yeah, and I guess that's the problem with the ideologue is you think you're having a conversation about the ideas, and the other person thinks you're having a conversation about
with them. Right?
And
because
then
they've lost themselves in the ideas.
Yeah,
right. Which is a really scary and very dangerous place to be because I forget. There's a guy who said a quote. I don't know the name of the guy, but the quote is like, "Ideas exist so that they can die instead of us," or something along those lines. But it's
Is that why Christ is the word?
There
he
you
had
go.
to be sacrificed.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's another good tie into the Christ as the Word, because you can
You
your
have
words
to
can die.
sacrifice words.
You can lay
Yeah.
them out there, and that's a vulnerable thing. So it's a humble thing to lay your words out, and then because you might be wrong.
Your words will die for your sins. Your words are your sins also, and they will die for your sins.
So is Jesus sin too then?
Well, he's the Word. That's two theological.
Yeah, I don't know. There's some
Backflips.
problems with that. Like your words being sin, I kind of disagree with that. A lot of people are pushing that idea that you can't say bad things anymore. Like
Right.
there's a line between doing them and saying them. There's definitely a line. Saying bad things isn't violence.
Well,
it
your
can be,
words
though.
that are sins are the ones that have to die, and the words that aren't sins are the ones that you don't that hopefully can
Well,
live and represent you.
You know, to kind of expand on that, the Christian perspective on speech, though, is like now I see things partially and incomplete. All that I know is, that's the 1 Corinthians quote. Paul says, all that I know now is partial and incomplete. And there's the poor mirror thing, or there's another thing. There's another verse somewhere about like all knowledge being incomplete or something like that. It's just that anytime that you say anything, it's always a sin. Or I guess there's the all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And I think that expands to just because you're manifesting a part of yourself when you speak. You can extrapolate that piece of that kind of theological statement that like everything that you say is a manifestation of a broken, an incomplete person.
Well,
I guess.
I don't know who it was, but a philosopher says that speech isn't ever actually going to be fully true, right? Or like the words themselves don't actually get to the actual meaning entirely. They try to get as close as they can, and maybe using more words you
That's what I'm
can
getting at too.
hopefully get in the general direction.
Right.
but-
And the more good words you use, the more you can at least approach, manifesting the idea.
Or on the other, and on the other side of the idea, the words are the only thing that are the reality.
Okay, expand on that a
Like
little. I don't know what
we
you mean.
only interact with the word. So anything that doesn't have a word doesn't exist because, well, what is it? Name it. Well, now it has a word and now it exists. So you only interact with things with
Right.
words.
Well, no, I don't think that's quite right, because even if you haven't vocalized it yet, you can like perceive something and like in your head, I kind of separate it from the rest of reality and think of it as a thing.
Things happen on like a deeper.
It can be
think
on a visual level.
you're just in your head now associating a label to it.
Okay,
A
but it's not
boundary. Almost like words are like
Are words
boundaries.
spoken? Like, is it a word until it's spoken?
Well, it's hard to say from this point in time. Like, can ancient people internalize language? They can't. They couldn't read in their head. Reading in your head is something relatively new.
Right.
So I don't know.
Wait, what?
Apparently, people used to not be able
to
to
read out loud, and some like probably a biblical
I thought he
scholar
was like
came
a
along and he
sorcerer
was
or something like
reading.
that.
He was reading a page without
just
reading it
didn't
out
believe
loud.
it.
It's like, how are you reading that?
Well, like most people couldn't read at all, right? And then
Right.
the people that could read, most of them could only read out loud, and then a select few. And there's like a kind of theories about prominent historical figures being, I can't name any off the top of my head, but being the ones that were able to read in their head, and it was a significantly advantageous ability.
I know. I
guess.
just forgot that's a skill you
The
learn.
higher learned.
And like back in the day, I was able to do it first before my sister. And like, how do you
Well,
always use your lips when you read?
Education on literacy is historically like only for kings, right? The
Yeah,
education
and the
that
thing
you
is, we
receive-
also started when we were children. Like we had so many advantages.
And I still feel like we're dumber than people back like 200 years ago, though.
In different
Even
ways.
though we've been, like I feel like they had a
So
way
that
stronger
everyone's-
memory.
Yeah, memory.
Yeah.
And just speaking ability. Like
Yeah.
most of our communication
Vocabulary.
isn't verbal anymore.
Mhm.
So
Well, we've outsourced memory technology,
Yeah.
mhm.
right? It's like it's basically based on the technological environment that we're in. We outsource or insource certain
Yeah,
skills.
Cyborgs,
In-house.
as Elon
In-source.
said.
In-source, in-house, I guess.
insort.
But I kind of like. Do you outsource your attention span, or is that just a lack of?
Outsource.
No,
What?
you don't. You don't. I'm just saying like there's some things that we outsource because that's beneficial to us, but other things just happen as a result of the environment that we're in, which is the shorter attention span.
I mean, outsourcing your attention span would be like setting timers, your schedule.
Oh, true. Okay, that's a bit more.
Well, that's
We're getting off topic.
yeah, that gets a little bit because like there's a. Have you guys seen the most recent Vsauce about time?
No.
You didn't.
You should
he
watch
did
it. It's
another
really.
Vsauce?
I'm pretty sure it's a new one.
The way time
very
moves
good.
and like you
Yeah,
interact
it's
with
about
time.
perception
man.
of time and
Yeah.
like this
Oh, I'm
time
excited
like
for that.
speeding up.
Oh,
So like now, well, like it's the most interesting thing that I found in it was in time travel. So interest in time travel is a modern thing because like pre-modern people would be like, why would I travel in time? It's just going to be like now, but with different people. Whereas for us, we have a perception about different places in time being radically different from the present. Whereas that's relatively new because of a frequent amount of
Acceleration
change.
of-
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
were to go back 200 years from like
Now.
300 BC to 500 BC,
Yeah, it's the exact same.
like you're just looking at
It's
a
just-
few grandparents.
Just more
back.
lonely. You don't have any interest, you don't have any relationships, no community.
Yeah.
Well, probably language has evolved a tiny bit.
But you might even be able to develop relationships easier than we would 200 years in the past because you'd have still more in
Still
common.
more in common. Jeez, yeah.
So this loops back to what we were talking about earlier is language skills. So being outgoing is kind of like the ability to improv with new people.
Try to just be a little closer, right?
So if you're, again, more introverted, you can be more open with people that you know well because you've practiced speaking with them. You kind of know what's coming and the sort of language they use.
Mm-hmm.
If you're more extroverted, you're probably a better improv conversationalist,
Right.
being able to speak with new people in a way that they're going to understand. So I'm not sure whether people would have those sorts of skills to meet people from a different time because they only speak with the people in their proximity in their own time, in their own neighborhood, which all speak in the same sort of way.
I feel like there's some things that are just universally human though. There's like
Sure.
some level of relation that's like deeper than culture and like society at the moment.
Yeah.
And like intuitive communicators will pick up on the things that are even more
well,
human.
religion is fundamentally that's the touchstone. Is like it's supposed to be kind of a collection of the patterns that exist lower than our individual subcultures. It's like that's the patterns that we all live on.
Well, is language even more primordial? Like
Than
is
religion?
like communication itself. Like he's saying like we have something in common. That's just basically our species in that we are a social species that tries to communicate.
Well, like a thing that came to mind is like the joke in the Bible about how God's going and taking a dump and that's why he's not answering their prayers. That joke is still funny to us because we
Right.
all go to the bathroom.
Well, yeah, so
Like-
that's
Okay,
like,
true. Yeah.
Like
so yeah, pooping is one of the
It's universal,
fundamental parts
yeah.
of being a creature
And he still
in the
made a
animal
poop
kingdom.
joke, and it's still funny.
Right. But the thing I was saying about religion is that we can relate to all beings that process food and shit it out on that level because we all do that. But it's like if there are patterns that literally everything that exists follows, then well, I mean
That is a pattern. Everything exists, follows.
everything shits.
Well, everything lives. Everything that lives does that process in
book
some
on
way.
Is there a book on that?
Yes.
Called Everything
kids'
Shits?
books.
Well, is it-
everybody poops.
is it like
Children's
entropy?
Everybody poops.
Yeah.
Does it talk about how like black holes poop or something like that?
Do we
Probably.
because we create meals that are like specific items and then we merge them together. So it's basically the law of entropy, which all matter.
Okay,
We're just
Okay,
we're
so
just
yeah,
machines
if you
for
want-
entropy.
But see, entropy was a better, like almost a more religious story to tell about that pattern than poop. Although I actually maybe poop is better because we can. It's a more visceral and more emotional reaction. Like I can follow that story better. When you say entropy, it's like that's a pretty vague and difficult like scientific concept
Well,
to understand.
it's just more modern, I guess.
Right. But poop is something I can understand. I know what
Yeah.
poop is. I've done one before.
Goes way back to Bible times too.
All the way back to Bible times and before.
I don't know about before though, because I haven't read anything about it yet.
Okay. But so, all right, let's circle back to specifically disagreement, because that's something that I want to really explore, especially because that's what I want to try to work on with this podcast, I think. I specifically want to figure out, I think there's a critical line where the disagreement says, you know, hey, we're not going to be in a relationship anymore. We're going to end this conversation, or we're going to end our friendship, we're going to end our association. And like, there's a reason that there's there's a time that you actually need to do that. Like, I don't think excommunication is intrinsically a bad thing. You need to decide who's on your team and who's not, or who's kind of part of your experiment with life and who's not, because you can't include everything or else you aren't anything. And so I guess, well, so with the room building thing, you can take somebody, you can have a conversation with somebody, even if a lot of your overlap, like a lot of your community, like you're not exactly in the same community, you might be able to build kind of a really small sub-community, a really small relationship, something that you relate on, a set of topics that you say, okay, we agree on this. What can we build from here? And then you can have a useful conversation with, you know, given those premises. But like, yeah, like I don't know why it is that like some people seem to be able to have a conversation with everybody, and some people just, it makes them really uncomfortable. Because, yeah, like, I mean, you look at somebody like Joe Rogan, and he'll talk to like anybody, and he'll almost always be able to say yes. And I mean, he'll still push back at certain times. Sometimes the guy seems to get a little bit, you know, a little bit too angry, a little bit too annoyed or something like that. I don't know, too argumentative. But yeah, like how is it that you can turn any conversation? Is it possible to turn any conversation into a useful one? Maybe that's a good question.
I think a conversation has two parties. So you can probably always do more to be better at making the conversation work, but you're never going to be able to, even if you're at 100% doing everything you should do, that doesn't mean the conversation's going to work. Because it requires...
How do you... Well, I guess to kind of let the rubber meet the road, I think the reason I wanted to even do this, or the reason that I like kind of signaled to be like, and I'm just kind of telling this story to myself because maybe this is the reason. I don't really know. For some reason, I just wanted to do this. But I think part of the reason might be that like I can see in my family, some family members are not willing to talk to other family members. And I want to figure out if that's an okay position to have. Like, I guess maybe it lands a little bit on family. Like,
well, what do you mean by okay? What's okay?
When did I say okay?
You asked some people, whatever, they can't talk to each other. Is that an okay position to have?
Like, I guess is there a time when that's the right decision to make? Like, is that...
Well, there's a time when it's not the most wrong decision. Like it's sort of a survivalist, I guess.
I don't know if that's the right question, because like, yeah, there's a time when that's appropriate, but the problem you're taking is that you don't agree that your family member is taking the stance at the head of this conversation they're having is right. So there is a right time to take that stance.
Right. I just don't think that it's right.
But you don't think it's right in this circumstance.
Yeah.
So I think you should ask a different question. And like, so why I thought what you were getting at with this is you see a need in society, generally speaking, which society is an extrapolation of your family in that sense. Like the subject matter expands out.
That was just a real
across
signal to me
anyways.
that this is a problem that's reaching everywhere, and now it's
Yeah.
hitting me.
Yeah, very personally. And so there's something in society that's happening that you're trying to figure out. And I'll just say a couple of things. One, I think you're a appropriate person an appropriate person to have conversations like that, because you have such an interest in conversation and disagreement, and you're open to hearing other people's disagreements. I don't know what advice we can give on how to get better at that skill of talking with people that you disagree with, but that's an interesting endeavor. And I would ask, are you more interested in speaking with people who you disagree with and getting better at that, or garnering advice from people who may have better ideas about how to address these problems in society?
I don't really know. I've been kind of pitching the idea to everybody who I've been asking if they want to come and hang out and have a conversation as sort of both, saying the point of this show is to learn how to have these conversations better and have them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You
yeah,
wanna
I mean,
say a couple other things.
okay, keep going then.
Well, we touched on low consequence conversation, which is just basically just doing things in real life and treating other people as like community. I think that's a word we were lacking in the friendship acquaintance group.
Yeah, okay.
So like someone who's in your community, you're not going to throw them out because they say something you disagree with. Like they can just be wrong on that and it's fine.
Well,
but
okay, just to really quickly push on that or just figure it out for a second. What is a community based on? Or I guess maybe communities can be based on different things, because sometimes a community is literally based on whether or not you believe something.
yeah, okay, so you touched on like a grand community can be everything that poops.
That's
Or
probably the
be
best community
based
to be
on
part of.
the scary thing which you mentioned was ideologies.
Right.
So
I
people
think we have better language. Like I'd say that calling everything that poops a community makes, to me, is not the proper use of the word community.
no,
I think there's a
I don't
minimum
think so,
requirement.
but I think it's bigger than ideology. I think it should be treated as bigger than an ideology. So something we've talked about is the campfire conversation, where people can freely go and just hang out with some neighbors, and it's okay to say things that other people are going to disagree with, because it's just a relaxed environment and you're just spitballing. Like you're throwing this idea out there and you want to hear what people have to say about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
And-
it's not ideology either. I think community has nothing to do with attributes. Like people think that like the way it's used today is we see a common attribute and call that a community. The black community,
Yeah.
the common attribute is
Yeah,
skin
which
color.
is really
Community has nothing to do with.
Yeah, I don't
It,
think
I think
that's
it literally
accurate.
has to do with a relationship.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Like you have to like
But to some
know the
extent-
person's name at least.
But so the most like loose form of a relationship would just be people that agree on some topic.
Well, they have to meet to
relate
agree.
On
They'd
anything.
have to at least have the
No,
conversation
I don't
that they agree.
because I think it's just a looser community, and I think the problem that you're addressing is just that we've begun to think about communities a little bit too much as just one attribute communities. It's just like metrics do play into our definition of a community. It's just that when it becomes only one metric, then it's not a very good, or it's just like that's a very, very, very loose
So
community.
what's the minimum number of attributes that have to be in common to call it a community?
I don't have to. That's not it's not a math problem. It's a feeling problem. It's like if I feel that we're a community, then we are one. Probably. It's like I don't know a community, but I'll know it when I see it or when I feel it.
Okay, so a community is something you feel you're a part of, not something that is able to be seen from the outside.
You feel Dutch?
Well, it's both. I mean, you can see a community from the outside. You can point at it and say that's a community.
But you don't have to be able to. And you can't,
Okay.
just because you see it as a community doesn't mean that it is.
Well, it doesn't
It's
become
kind
a
of-
word until you point at it and say that's a community, like you said.
Well, then if the community disagrees, are they still a community? If you
Right.
say that's a community and they're like, I don't feel like I have anything. Well, okay, now I'm thinking community. Is the word common? Is that
Yeah, I think
commune. No, to
Commune.
commune together. But anyways, like these are all kind of moot. Like
Okay.
if someone
These are all
feels,
moot. Let's get to the real
if
shit,
someone
Andrew.
feels they have something in common with another person, like like we're both Dutch, we can get along over that and talk about things that we understand in our culture,
Yeah.
or we're both Black and we can understand that part of our experience in life, and so we can be a part of a community together, or we live in the same neighborhood. Brantford things, like we talk about that, right? So it just having anything in common can be a basis for forming a community, but a problem arises when you take a hard line stance over people being outside of a particular community being unacceptable. Now, I didn't quite finish the idea I was talking about a moment ago. We'll have to just come back to that. I've lost it.
Remember it.
Well, you guys went back and forth for like 4 minutes.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I think the community thing is interesting. There was something you just said that sort of piqued. Now I'm losing it.
You both lose your thing.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
okay,
no.
you sit on that. But,
You got
but-
something again? Okay.
yeah, so I was talking about like you wanted to subsidize conversation that is healthy, which I call like the campfire conversation, where there's low consequence for throwing out ideas. And that is just the opposite we've all talked about of what social media is, where there's high consequence for saying fucking anything.
In low
Like
cost.
you just
Everyone
like
can do it.
wait, you have that opinion, unfriend, like you just lost 10 friends. Like what the hell? It's
Well,
ridiculous cost.
It's funny because it has the appearance of being extremely low cost for some reason. It's masqueraded as like you just say anything. You literally tell people what you're having for lunch. Like you don't tell people what you're having for lunch. That's private information, okay? Tell somebody who cares about what you're having for lunch, what you had for lunch. You just tell everybody that.
It's like upfront low cost, but you're like deferring the cost, and then it's super heavy. Whereas like in-person
yeah.
conversations are the opposite. You like basically getting there is the hard part, like getting to a relationship or being in person at a event with someone, and then
Well,
like-
part of what makes a conversation, part of the way that you that what did you say you you subsidize a conversation, you subsidize people putting their words out there, is that you make the punishment for leaving larger than the punishment for just saying something dumb. Because if we're having a conversation and you say something I disagree with, or I say something that you disagree with, and you just like kind of make a joke about it, that might make me feel a little bit humiliated or like a little bit bad. But like there's a lot more of a social frowning on me just standing up and leaving. It's like, whoa, what's up with that guy? He couldn't take like being told he was wrong. That's like, that guy is not stable emotionally. Like that's a big cost to pay if you just stand up and walk away. On social media, we totally flip that and we just say we just make it totally appropriate to just not engage if you don't want to, and to also ignore messages, except for we also have now that stupid little indicator that says whether or not somebody's read your message or not. So that it's kind of two sides of that.
I think personal messages are a bit different.
They're a bit
than,
better, yeah.
than general posts. Where I think that's a good point about the ability to kind of disengage, and even like people it's almost become a spectacle on the internet, like people unfollowing you, or like
whoa, so
or
dramatic.
yeah.
I
don't know-
unfollowed
I don't
10
know if
people
it's even
today.
anyone's fault. Like I just don't think people are good at communicating in that way.
Right.
Like we rely so heavily on so many things which are more than just the text words. And then someone sends you text words and you're like, what the fuck, dude?
Well, it's the problem of being overly invitational and inviting way too many people into the same room to have a conversation and not actually having any bearing on like what you agree on. Like there's no good, that's not a good way to have a conversation. You can't start a conversation by just saying you disagree with everybody about everything, but you also can't have a good conversation, or you can't build a good relationship or build a good community by just inviting everybody in and saying just say everything.
Don't tell me what I can't do.
I'm just telling you what I think might work.
Okay, I'm kidding.
Because so the problem of being too invitational, for one thing, it's boring. Because like we already discussed, a conversation begins to be interesting as soon as you find out what you disagree on. Because it's like, oh, there's the information. Okay, so maybe we can unpack that for a second. Because like, why is it interesting for somebody to disagree with you? It's like that's a signal for adventure. It's a signal that, whoa, there's something I maybe don't know here because that doesn't make sense. and like making sense would be like lining up with all of the kind of the things I believe or the things I understand already. So it's like, oh, this is a signal that there are things out there that I don't understand. Maybe I just don't understand why you're wrong, and you're going to explain it to me, and then I'm going to be able to point to why you're wrong. But maybe I'm going to understand why I'm not right, or why I'm wrong, or why there's something that I haven't understood yet, that maybe you have something to offer to me. So like disagreement, like it makes sense that that's a signal for interest, because like I don't care about just like if you just sit there and tell me what you agree with me about, I'm just hearing stuff I already know and believe. To some extent, that can be a little bit, affirming. It can be kind of nice to have somebody just tell me I'm right, but it, circle jerk has a negative connotation for an obvious reason. Like people just patting each other on the back is like, it's not useful. It's useless. No, it's not useless, obviously. I'm contradicting myself.
Yeah,
it's obviously, community. Yeah, there's community too. Yeah, you need both.
Well, yeah, people just patting themselves.
That goes back to honesty or dishonesty. So,
okay,
a dishonest interpretation of your words in a negative context is dangerous and is using speech for war, whereas dishonest interpretation of your words or dishonest words on the active part is harmful in that it's causing you to believe something untrue. So that's giving someone a pat on the back when they're wrong because you don't want them to feel bad. But ultimately that's short-term gains and long-term they're gonna continue to be wrong about that, and there's consequences for being wrong.
And so the metric that you weigh that against is how much do I need to agree with you for you to feel like I'm going to continue to be your friend when I tell you that I disagree with you about something? Because on the surface level,
it doesn't even have to be being your friend,
or just being somebody that you would be willing to hear a critique from.
So, like I was going to say, on a societal level. Okay, we'll start with the community level. You don't throw someone out because you disagree with them. And then...
Well, charismatics do.
Okay. Well, I won't tell them what they can and can't do.
Well, apparently we do.
But I mean in the sense of a good strategy, I don't think you should throw out someone from your personal community because you disagree with them on something that isn't having like life and death or dangerous, like really actually dangerous consequences. And then on a grander scale, you shouldn't throw out people from the more
general community,
ethereal, I don't know,
softer community
communities because they disagree with you on something. Like this guy thinks this. Let's get him out of the knitting community on Reddit. Like it's ridiculous.
Here, I think it comes back to the it's about so whenever there's a disagreement, what does that mean? It means that somebody or something is going to die here, and hopefully that's not a human being, but it could be just an idea in your head. But the problem is that your ideas that are in your head are usually nested within a larger groups of ideas, or you could call them ideologies, whatever, just like communities. I don't know, we're throwing a lot of words around here, but like any idea that you believe, oftentimes it's connected to a community of people that you believe it with. And so, if somebody pokes a hole in an idea that you think has a lot to do with the core of that community, then they might be throwing your whole if it's wrong, then that means your whole community might be at risk.
Well, I think
so there's a
third option. So you said a second option. You said like in a disagreement, either somebody or something has to die. There can also be a insufficient evidence to execute outcome where, both of us sort of intuitively believe something. We come up on that. We try to argue each other's point. Neither side feels that the other was sufficient.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to ask you, because you spent some time trying to parse out like a couple of strategies for like what do you do when you disagree with somebody, or what are the possible results for an argument? Do you remember? Did you come to any
I don't
good stuff
remember
there?
that. Oh, was that at Christmas? We talked about like we had a couple. Was that what that came out of?
Maybe I don't.
Try-
It was
I
something
don't
you were
remember
talking to
that.
Sarah about. You were talking.
don't
This was a
remember.
little bit earlier in last year, so maybe you've
Okay.
lost it by now. But
Now he just ends relationship.
Well, I think that's probably at least one of the things was like agree to disagree is an option.
right. Well,
Or-
and that's where you just kind of sideline that conversation and say maybe there's something else we agree
Mm-hmm.
about, or maybe you know that there's something else you agree about, and so
Mhm.
you have to kind of then you
You
shift
can
the focus of
return
your
there.
relationship to that.
Yeah.
Well, and so something was talking to Evan about the other day is that like if you like I think maybe a hospitable way of having a disagreement without even vocalizing it is like I don't think you always need to let people know that you disagree with them. That's the yes and thing, is that you can always disagree with somebody if you really want to, if you really want to look for a disagreement thing. But like if you're trying to establish something, if you're trying to establish a relationship with somebody first, you kind of give them some grace for some generalizations and say, okay, I probably agree with where you're going with that, so just keep going. Like it's not I certainly agree with, like, again with the the sort of statement, I think we all agree with it. Like every time you say something, it's not perfectly true anyways. So if you just kind of take that as your stance when you're starting a conversation with somebody, they say something that's not quite true, it's like you don't have to point that out. You're looking for the ideal time to say, that's wrong enough that maybe we could try to figure out, we could try to parse that out. We could try to explain why that's wrong.
Fact check. Not entirely true.
Well,
Yeah.
I think both parties need to be invested enough to see it through, and I think that's sort of what you'd be trying to feel out before you'd engage is like if this person care enough that I think that they're wrong. Because if they don't care, like if they don't think your opinion has any value yet, then your sharing it it's just gonna be a waste of time. And I guess that's, again, it would be an agree to disagree, which isn't necessarily like you could just move past it. You could say it, but I guess it has more potential for harm than potential for good. Or at least your assessment at that time would be that this could potentially harm, and I probably don't have enough sway here to even, like potentially I could learn that I'm wrong about thinking they're wrong, but they're not even, might not even see it worth it to try and convince me of that. So
this is like, I feel like we've got some stuff down here as far as kind of trying to really intellectually break down some of the really intellectually.
Oh, yeah.
But like, okay, we're asking some questions about it, but like when I usually start a conversation, I just start saying stuff. And I don't know where I'm going. I just start saying words like.
Is
kinda
this
what's on
meta
my
again?
mind. Pardon?
Is this meta again?
I mean, this whole thing is meta.
No, but you're literally trying to see where you're
trying to
going.
just say
I'm just saying that.
He's doing it right now.
Well, no, I guess
Hypothetically-
I'm saying that because I literally, I
Gears are
wanted to,
turning.
because I want to see where this is going to go for a second. I want to maybe
If
start a
I
new conversation, I guess.
hypothetically-
Because but it's still meta because I want to, like, I've noticed how much my life has been experiencing. That's not a good way of saying it.
What?
I felt so much more like engaged with life and so much more interested in life since we've started having conversations more often. Like since we decided to sit down and start a book club, it was like almost everything that I do seems to mean more now.
Okay, so it's like that's brought to light how useful it is to actually hear what other people have to say. So a lot of times when you're engaging with people on a just basic day-to-day level, you're not saying anything interesting to each other. You're going through the motions, you're running the script. I'd like to buy this from some store. You just have the basic store conversation you order at a restaurant, whatever. Like, you know what you both are going to say. You could play it out and it's 90% correct. And there's nothing interesting happening there. and then you're talking to the same people throughout the day about the same old things that happen, and you all agree because you live in a household with people of the same political affiliation. So we've talked a lot about our books that we're reading, and it's so interesting to hear the thoughts other people have about the same subject matter, and it doesn't occur to you yourself. Same with that other book club we did with the yoga class. Like, I got no value out of that thing myself, but hearing everyone else's ideas was so valuable.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like just all the conversation you've been having surrounding that, that brings to light like how useful it could be to hear other people's subject matter on what topics, politics, like society in general.
Yeah. Well, so that's one side of it, but I think part of like, maybe I'm not even talking about conversation, maybe more so just like community is like, this is one of the most real and tight communities I feel like I've ever been a part of, because like almost everything I'm doing, I'm thinking like, oh, I can't wait to tell the guys that. I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because there's like a really established sense of like, any one of us could probably say just about anything. Maybe that's because we know we kind of agree enough with each other about some core things that is like, there's nothing you could throw at me that would make me, that would make me disown you. So like it's totally free game here. Say as crazy of a thing as you want, and like I can get past it even if I really, really disagree, because like somehow I know that like maybe you're just wrong, and I would have a good intuition that one of us is going to be wrong. Maybe my interpretation of why that idea you're saying is so bad is just wrong, or maybe what you're saying is just wrong. Like I have like a deep sense of like we're going to get through this because we've been through enough together already. So I think that happens on a really micro scale with the conversation. Is like every time that you have an agreement, or every time you make your way through a disagreement, you establish that, hey, we made it through a disagreement that big, or we made it through a problem that big, and now we could maybe do that again.
But I think that was like what kind of was the seed that made this happen, is that you and Connor were having a conversation at your bachelor party, and you're like, he's saying things that I disagree with. And this is interesting. No, you guys were talking. I think you guys were talking about like Calvinism or something.
Okay.
And it was like, oh, wow, that was a fun disagreement conversation. And
Maybe.
then out of that, like we
Okay.
also
Well,
happen to like reading books.
Yeah, like I think this
So
is
these are-
fun because I don't think there's any potential for like offense here.
Well, this is the thing, is even if there's offense is the core of, I mean, on a really technical level, that's playing the game. It's like, oh, you said something and now that offends me. And sometimes
okay.
I took, like, that was offensive to me, that
I'd
hurt.
rephrase that. All of us have a high tolerance for
right,
offense.
exactly. It's a tolerance thing.
Yeah, we have
Right.
like very high, and which is like why do we even probably have different tolerance for offense for each other and than for other people? Like why do we have?
Right. Well, that's the trust part of it.
Is
It's
there
just
like investment?
So, and I think that I don't know why a room seems like a good analogy for me, but anyways, when you're building a house, when you're building a conversation with somebody, like I said, every disagreement you get through, you're establishing that level of trust with each other. You're really, really, and I guess I've been noticing this because I've been having a lot of really fresh conversations with people where it's like I've never talked to them before, and just like you're really tiptoeing around for a little bit and seeing how heavily can I step in this room, how good are these floorboards going to hold us up, because I don't know to what extent we agree, to what extent we have a relationship. And so you're feeling out and then building a relationship from there, and then saying, okay, I can say that. Okay, he agreed with that. Okay, maybe I can push a little bit deeper there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Eric Weinstein's talking about this, where like you can, there's certain people you can simulate easily and certain people you can't. And this is an interesting group because I think we know each other well enough to simulate each other pretty well. So that gets back to you saying like when we're not here, like I'd agree. Like when I'm not at book club, I'm oftentimes scripting trying to simulate you guys in a conversation, but
That's
I'm also
exciting because you
very
can't quite
excited
do it.
because I can't quite do it. So it's exactly to tie back to that earlier dichotomy of improv versus scripting. I can try to do the scripting and that part's fun, but I can't quite do it. So then I get excited about, I wonder
what he's
how
gonna
this
say,
will
yeah.
go once we can get to that point. It's kind of a balance there where it's partly having investment in knowing the person, and then I don't know, being I don't know what the other attribute is that makes someone hard to script. There's some sort of unpredictability.
Isn't it just
it might just be intelligence. I was trying to avoid just saying
Well, I think part of
just
it's
smart
that
guys.
everyone has a willingness to change, and they are changing.
Well, but
let's say you figure out Garrett believes this, and then the next week he's like, I just heard about this, and it kind of shifts his belief a little bit, and even those little changes.
there's that, but there's also the level of a really, and I so you said intelligence, and that was funny, but also I don't think it's just it just really depends. There's a lot of theories of what intellect even means, but there's just basically belief it presupposes a lot of cognitive dissonance. You believe a whole bunch of things, and it's not you don't ever believe things starting from one axiom. You start with a couple different axioms, and you build stuff, and then eventually you realize there's disagreement between the structures you've built, and you don't know which one of your axioms the virus is in, which one of them needs to be buffeted or reprogrammed or rebuilt a little bit. And so it's tough, and so you have a whole bunch of little things that you, so to maybe be a little bit more clear about what I mean by an axiom, so it's just something you believe without evidence. It's just you start there. It's a starting thing. Something seems to be true, and then you build things from that. You say, okay, I think this, and this are true, and then you try to be sort of logical from there. And if all of them are absolutely correct, which is impossible, all of the things that you build are going to be correct as well. But it's just they're going to sort of approach correctness. They're going to be you're going to have axioms that are pretty good, and you're going to, maybe they're really pretty good. You're going to have axioms anyways. You're going to believe things, and you're going to build arguments based on them. And I'm getting lost in how.
So yeah, wait. Does this connect in that we know each other's axioms, but none of us are so ideologically dedicated to an axiom that's we can easily predict that that's the one that each other's going to play out. So I know that
okay.
there's I don't have one friend that's Garrett. I almost have a dozen Garrett friends that all are different sides of his beliefs that can be applied really
it's
on,
just about
on
how
almost a
big your
pragmatic
friend
level.
is.
Yeah, it's you guys have enough.
You just call me you guys.
Well, all of you guys, and then all of the versions of you are unique enough that I always know which one I'll engage with.
Well, because I don't even know which one you're going to engage with, because it's they're all just and this is something I really like to do. So the conversation is something that's happening out here, but there's also little conversations happening inside of each one of our usness, and it's it's awesome because you never know who's going to take the wheel and grab the mic and say something.
I think that's what you read is going to affect that too, though. It's whatever's fresh.
Right, okay, yeah.
And
start
these new ideas, and you're I wanted to try this out. I read this, so this little person in my head gets to have the mic and try this idea out.
Yeah, which is fun. And there's obviously a level of different ideas you're kind of more or less invested in. And so the investment thing, that's the stakes thing. If we're kind of trying to do the economy analogy, it's depending on how deeply you are invested in a particular set of ideas, that's how serious it is to you when somebody starts knocking on those ideas.
Okay. Yeah, so the stakes are high if you're voicing an idea that's very important to you.
Right.
And there's a chance of it being refuted.
That's okay, obviously, because you need to have things there needs to sort of be a rank ordering of of how you invest in your ideas. You don't invest everything in one idea, and you don't equally spread your investments out into all your ideas, because some of them just seem to be better to you. So you should probably invest more deeply in those ideas.
Mm-hmm. Well, the scientific analogy is there's scientific theories that you apply to whatever you're looking at that aren't always compatible with each other. right? So there's certain, theories of the universe that you would use a different theory based on the situation. And if you're basically an ideologue is trying to use one theory for every situation, and they're probably doing most things poorly because of that. And then so they basically have the stakes are too high on the one theory. They're over invested. They need to diversify.
All right, you really want to go there? Because I do have a wealth simple code. Diversify your portfolio. Stick with your core axioms, your main SP 500s, and then maybe 30% or 20%.
I just like the stock, man.
Well, see
20% of your portfolio into volatile ones again, that may go really high.
That's our tithe. That's our Sabbath, right? That's the diversity principle, is that we invest in a certain idea to a majorative extent, and then we kind of make sure that we always leave some of our idea investment budget open to kind of throw around at other ideas that might not be as deeply ours.
Did you see what I was kind of saying is like, if you have like your general things that are more consistent and they're less likely to change, like these like core very large companies, they don't move as quickly. Same with your ideas. And then you invest a little bit in these smaller ones that are likely to, they might skyrocket
Or they might not.
or they'll crash, but you don't have as much invested in them in the first place.
I love economics. I know like literally zero about it, but every time somebody starts talking about economics, it just seems to like, there's so many great analogies to just game theory and life. I'm not sure
it's just like the game that we're playing. Like the human game, the most, it's like, well, because games are simulations of basically that. That's the thing that we simulate when we're calling them games. Right?
Yeah, who can get the most?
Yeah.
That's always it.
Who can get the most the?
Who can get the most?
The most.
Yeah, just most. Do you have the most? I have the most. It's right here.
So are the richest people the best people then?
No, they're the best people within that given game. So here's this is a good. I don't know if this is good. Anyways, there's a difference.
Here's a thing.
So there's an idea that I've been thinking about as far as like thinkers and feelers. And I told you this a little bit before already, but like I've been contrasting a lot stories and games, and you can let me know if you think this is a good contrast, because I've been applying this to a lot of stuff, and at least in my little brain it's been making sense. But I think the difference between a game and a story is that a game has clearly defined rules. A game has a scoring system. A game has basically has a metric that says this is success. A story, on the other hand, is a lot more abstract. It basically can encompass an infinite number of metrics, but it's just a little bit harder necessarily to follow along. Like stories are always basically open to interpretation. That's the downside of them, is that it's like there's, you don't know if the good guy won. I mean, sometimes there's a really simple story and it's like very clear, what's going on. It's like, to that extent, it just seems like it's a bad story, or it's like a boring story, because really interesting stories are stories that like are big, that spread into a lot of things that are abstract, that kind of pull a whole bunch of ideas together, and you have to think about it.
Okay, hold up. What's the same about a game and a story? You started explaining the difference. I don't know why. Like, what's the same? Like, obviously they're different.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay. I guess both of them have a sense of progress, but it's just that the idea of progress within a story is a lot more abstract, and it's just like the difference between abstract progress and very metrified progress.
Well, progress is just like units of time forward. Like there's like,
well, so that's the game of time. But I'm saying
the story of time.
The story. Well, that's the thing. I think that both of them are like, stories are just games that are more abstract, and games are just stories that are more simple, or more like clearly defined what progress is. Basically, it's just about the goals that are involved. So the ethics of a story are very, very abstract, and the ethics of a game, it's like it's very clear what is win and what is lose, right? Those are absolutes. With a story, it's like it's totally open. or like the more it becomes a story, the more it becomes like a great work of fiction, is like the more it becomes difficult to kind of say what's going on, where it becomes difficult to really kind of parse out this is success, this was failure.
It's almost just the game and the meta game.
Okay.
Right, because the game has a clear winner, but the meta game, if the winner's a sore winner,
Right.
isn't a clear winner, right? Which is now the story of the game.
Right. So it's just how meta it
guess.
gets.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I freaking love dichotomies for some reason. I always want to like make everything about. But I think that's a good one. Is just like simplicity versus complexity, because both of those different types of stories or games, whatever you want to call them, give you a different sort of bang for your buck.
Well, a game is almost like internally complete, like it's an enclosed system,
Yeah.
and a story is an open system.
Well, it's just that a game is a system, is an open system that leans more towards being closed, and a story is a
I think a story is an open system that leans towards being closed. An open system that's just open is just reality, and then a story's leaning towards being closed, and a game is enclosed.
I don't. Okay, you said you think reality is just, as soon as reality becomes reality, it stops being an open system because it becomes defined. Like,
okay, so then there's just
but in terms of story,
nothing.
Okay, so you might have an idea here. I don't know if it's good.
I don't either.
I'm not seeing story and game as being the same category of thing at all. Like, so you wanted to compare a story to reality. Like, okay, so it can stop being a story because it just doesn't start or stop anywhere, and you can just go look at someone else. Like, a story takes focus in on, it could be reality or some idea of what could be a reality. A game is something that is a specific thing. I don't see it being related to a story necessarily. You're analyzing success on some metric, and you can analyze a larger game, so you can win the board game but lose the conversation game because you were an asshole.
because those are two different games.
But you're analyzing it in terms of games. It doesn't have to necessarily, like, I guess that can be a short story.
Well,
I don't know.
The reason I'm just drawing the comparison in the sense that they both have the idea of progress, and that's already what I said. It's just like both of them are trying to kind of play with that idea in different ways. Games is playing with the idea of progress, that like, here are the rules. Stories, we don't know the rules.
Okay. So they're just narratives.
Right. So but yeah, so they're both narratives, but one is more rule focused and one is more I don't know focused.
See, the game itself is just the rules. So there can be a narrative in a game within the context of those
Right.
rules.
Okay. Especially modern video games too.
Well, no, any game. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
that way.
the definition of the game is like the rule book. That's what
Right.
the game is.
Don't you put rules around stories based on genres?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Is that both of them have to include each other. It's like a game still holds a little bit of storyness to it, in the sense that like there's a start and an end, and you're trying to get somewhere. It's just that there's very clear, the boundaries at least are a lot more clear than a great novel,
Yeah.
or even just an experience that you have, and then you're telling a story about your
Like
experience.
a good game should be a totally enclosed system of rules. There's bad games that are slightly open, and they're almost just stories that you play with friends or something.
Well, no, but okay. So what do you mean by open then?
It's like you, I guess, interpretable, or in
Okay.
some sense.
Is Minecraft a good game?
Is
Is it a game?
Minecraft a
Is
game?
it a game? I don't know. Well, yeah, it blurs the line a little bit too, because there's not a clear. You don't win.
They do have a
But there
way you
is
can
there
win.
is code. Code is law.
Okay, that's what means it's closed.
Well, no, that's what I'm
In a
saying. Is that
sense.
Yeah, okay, so you actually, I thought you were memeing, but actually that might be a good question, because
Yeah.
what even is success in that, right? Is it slaying the dragon so you can get its egg?
That is
Or is
what,
it
like there is an
building-
ending to
Is
it.
it building a big farm that spawns monsters and you collect their items? Or like automating stuff? Is it making a computer that, like an actual computer in Minecraft?
with the logic scheme
Yeah,
system
like
stuff.
what's
So
what's
nuts.
victory, right? Like, it kind of isn't a game.
Well, is
It's-
that the requirement
it's
of game?
a
Because you said
system.
rules earlier. You said rules are the requirement,
Yeah,
and
I'm
the
not sure I
code
agree
is
with
the
that.
victory
rules.
condition,
Yeah.
kind of.
Like, so to my, as far as my whole analogy thing and my comparison, this dichotomy thing is that, yeah, a game is something with a clearly defined destination, or at least a lot more clearly defined, like, goal.
Okay.
Like there's winning
So
terms.
it's rules and a goal. And a lot of the time within a story, the permissible actions are outside of what we would think in terms of a game normally.
Mhm.
Like a story seems so open-ended, and you can win the game by doing just about anything. And winning the game just means accomplishing the goal.
Right. But
So stories are you can have a short story about a simple game, and it can be interesting. It's probably not that interesting. But a story about the grand game of life is a lot more interesting because the goal can be so lofty, and the story can establish a goal and make it clear whether or not
Yeah.
the person was victorious, or it can be more nebulous and you're not sure what victory was supposed to be.
right. Well, the other side of it is that I think games are more experienced through, or more interacted with through thinking. It's not as much of a feels experience, whereas stories are more about feeling. And obviously, both of them are things you have to use both faculties to experience.
It's funny because you're trying to make a dichotomy, like you said, and it kind of is one of those things where there can.
I'm just saying it leans in
Yeah,
this
yeah, I
direction.
know.
They both include
Because you
each
have
other.
like story-based
But,
games.
yeah. Again, what's the difference between thinking and feeling?
Well, okay, so the difference between okay, maybe,
this is quite a can of
What's
worms. But I think if you're gonna make that statement, you gotta at
Okay.
least
Well,
say.
I'm leaning more into rules versus like or few rules versus many rules. Simple system versus complicated system. Complicated system is more story. Simple system is more game.
So that I mean that moves away from the definition of goal, because really, I guess the more complicated the rules, the harder it is to define the goal. So in a very obvious game, the rules even would point to the goal. Like you could almost tell the goal based on the rules. In reality, we have people that think that you can look at the laws of physics and find the goal, but it's not exactly obvious that that's the case. Because the rules are so complex, they don't point to a goal.
Kind of using the word rule in two different
A
ways,
law.
kind of. Well, like the rules of a game is like the ways, like I guess the ways that dictate how you're allowed to play it.
Yeah, the things
And
you're
then-
allowed to
and
do.
then the
So
rules are like the laws of physics dictate how.
Yeah, those
you're
are the
able to
rules of
function.
reality.
So I guess another way of saying is that games would be more bottom up and stories would be more top down.
Well, isn't the opposite? The game is more top down, where you have the goal and then you create rules to point you to the goal. So the you should be able to read the rules and kind of see what the goal is. The story is bottom up, where there's seems to be rules but you're trying to figure out what anyone's trying to do. So like that's sort of the more complicated the rules, the more harder it is to see the goal. Was like if I'm trying to teach someone a game, or someone's trying to teach me a game, the first question is, what's the goal? Am I trying to get a high score, a low score?
But
Yeah.
And then you explain the mechanism through which I get points. Whereas a story, you kind of start by explaining, this is a way that you get points. Is it good to get points? We don't know yet.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily like, so points are a thing that we invent for small games that we make to represent progress towards some goal.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can set our goals arbitrarily. So we talked about is Minecraft a game? It's more of a universe, like reality is a universe. You can make your goal to accrue a lot of wealth and have a safe and easy and comfortable and pleasurable living, or you can try to have as much pleasure as possible, or you can try and propagate your lineage, or you can try and build something great that people will recognize. Like you can set any goal.
Yeah, you know what? I think I made a mistake, because even though the rules are more clear with games and less clear with stories, it might actually be more so the case that with stories, the idea of morality or ethics or progress is more clear. Got to try to digest that for a second, but because to some degree, telling a story, it's more of a...
Well, remember the conversation we had with Ken?
Yeah. It's ignorance of, or it's like it's intentionally discarding most of the information.
Well, yeah. So I think the rules are the most clear in a story, in that people, if your story doesn't follow some set of rules, people are eventually just going to stop listening. Right? If it doesn't make sense, it's stupid. It's like I'm going to stop listening. But you don't have to have a goal. In fact, typically what I'm trying to do is figure out the goal based on the rules that you seem to be following with the story. And that's sort of like a simulation of a life. I'm sort of, people seem to be following rules in society, and I'm trying to figure out what we're trying to pursue, why we're following these rules. What's the goal?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a, I don't know, it's the compare, like I don't know why I want to put those two things in the same, like why I want to compare those two things. I guess I just had the intuition that, okay, like if there's sort of, well, at least the feeling thinking thing lines up with it pretty well anyways.
You wanted to draw some relationship between thinking and game and feeling and story. Is that it?
Yeah.
Or that was your intuition that those were related in that way? I think we need to talk more about thinking and feeling later.
Yeah.
But what we can say at least now is that games occur within systems, and you can tell stories about things that occur in that system.
Well, okay, so games and stories are both simulations.
Simulations. Okay. Well, you got to be clearer about what you mean by a simulation, because I don't know why that is a word that should encompass both.
They're I don't know, in some way separated from reality, but they need to be like enough to reality for us to do them. Okay. So they're like little distilled versions of reality. Mm-hmm. But I think maybe you're onto something with what they're distilling from reality. Whereas a game is distilling the situations where you're in pursuit of a goal, typically in competition, sometimes in cooperation with people, and a story is pursuing where you're trying to intuit rules.
Yeah, well, and for some reason, like a story seems more inclusive to me. Like a game is very much like, no, you're not allowed to do that in this game. With a story, there's so much more room for mystery and like anything could happen here, because like it's this, and to maybe relate it back to the whole agreement versus disagreement thing. It's like a story is more the yes and principle, and a game is more like a shutting down of and a cutting out of certain things and saying this is what we're gonna do. This is a very clearly defined metric of this is what's happening right now.
But we said as a definition of a story, that's what it is. When you tell about your day, it's about cutting out all of the other things and specifically focusing on certain things, though. That's
true, but it's just that to that extent, a story is like it's a distillation of information, but it's just that you're still sort of trying to evoke many things by whatever you're telling that story. It's like you're simplifying it, but like the idea is that this isn't all there is. This is a story to kind of represent something. That's what it's about. It's a representation.
It represents. Well, that's what I meant. Like it's a simulation of the way you live. Like I won't watch of recording of your whole day, but I'll listen to you simulate your day, which is really just the pattern or the rules that you lived by through the day. And it doesn't tell me what the goal is, but it tells me it's simulated the rule aspect of the reality.
The rule aspect of it?
Yeah, the pattern.
Well, because I think just thinking about telling somebody about my day, the only things I tell you about them are the things that don't meet the pattern. Like, I don't tell you, like, it's like if it's normal for me, it's not worth discussing. When I talk to you about my day, I tell you about the weird hiccups that happen.
Okay, yeah. So maybe pattern is a misleading word to use there. But like in what you did in the more unique scenarios, tell me your values. Tell me your rules. Tells me about the rules that you live by. Like it tells me about the big patterns that you live by.
So
right?
so in some way though, that it's like it's getting at more things. It's including principles that talk about more things than just like, so with a game, that's what I'm saying, is a game is much more closed. It's like a game is about this and doing this and like trying to get here.
Yeah.
But like a story is like, as far as application of it, it's about everything, hopefully. Depending on how good of a story it is.
I would ultimately probably be trying to derive your goals based on the decisions you made. I could kind of say what you would, I would, as a listener, try to say what you would do.
And to the extent that you find the story compelling, though, it's like that's letting you know maybe the story. Or it's like
what we are doing,
right? Or yeah, and then the more you extrapolate that into a more abstract thing, it's like what reality is doing, right? And like in what,
which is sort of what I mean by the rules, or the goal. Sorry,
right? The goal, yeah, because the rules are a separate thing.
Yeah, the rules are in the story. When you tell me a story, when you tell me about the exception and how it went, you would see a rule. Like that's what archetypes are. They're the rules in the patterns or the rules. Okay. It's like people embody this character, and when they do that, this happens. It's sort of a rule.
Okay, that's good.
That's where I was feeling.
I think one last thing about, you're saying rules. So I guess rules more aligns with the universe, like the laws of that system, and the game is mostly just the goal. So a story is interesting in terms of how the protagonist reaches the large goal, because the rules for that game are so ill-defined, but the rules for the system are well understood if it's based on your reality.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, it's just like, so games are interesting because it is a closed system, and like to the extent that it's a good game, it's like that, to the extent that it's like reflecting reality very well. And like if you can learn how to be good at that game, those strategies might serve you well in other games. And it's like a game is useful because it might be useful in meta games. But a story, similarly, is like it's totally approaching things from that end. It's like this is about all of the games, or about a large number of games, and you would figure out whether or not it's useful by applying it to more specific games. Is that, I don't know, that kind of made sense in my head. Is that landing for everybody?
Sleepy.
I'm not sure if that's your definition of like a game being a good game. If it's, what did you say? Do you remember?
A game is a good game if the principles you learn in it might, I guess maybe they contribute to the story you can tell about reality. Or like a game is a good game if the principles you learn from playing it are applicable to other games, or the strategies you learn from playing it. It's like it's not that interesting of a game if it's too specific and too specialized that anything you learn how to do it is totally counterintuitive to everything else you would, or totally counter, like just the opposite of useful for everything else you would want to do.
I think a game is a good game if the rules don't dictate how to win.
Okay, so this brings it back to what I was thinking about large games, like you said Minecraft, and I was thinking like, well, what about World of Warcraft or any MMO? You have players who play them drastically differently because we call it a game, but in itself, it's not a game, it's a system. Like it's a universe.
It's a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it can contain stories and it can contain games.
Right.
So World of Warcraft has combat games where people play 1 versus 1 battles or group battles, or it has games where you're playing like against programmed enemies and you have to accrue a lot of gear and high levels, or it has games where people just go on there and pretend to be different people and tell stories.
Yeah.
Well, so
Like,
that's not a game. I think the
It's-
definition
it
of a
itself
game.
is a system.
So he say
it's a
yeah,
universe.
Yeah.
And
system
it
is a
has
universe.
games
Okay.
and it has stories.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I think it's yeah.
That's
yeah.
a good set
So
of
just
terms,
be-
though, is that systems, games, and universes, games and stories exist within systems.
Okay, Connor.
Is systems just like
It's a word. It means I'm equating that to universe, system, universe.
yeah? It's just like reality.
what
It's
did you
systems?
What did you say about?
But it doesn't have to be reality because you just said that World of Warcraft is.
It's reality. Why is it not
He's saying
reality?
it is in the sense that we say any other book is the Bible because it
because
it
it's a
repeats
version
the
of
same
reality.
principles.
Okay.
Well,
So
To some extent, yeah.
it's
how is it
analogous.
outside of reality? Are you saying that? I'm saying it's not outside of reality.
He's saying that it is a
And,
reality.
and
in
a lot
itself.
of people, in fact, live their lives in those realities, and often a problem because you are a physical body. So
But they don't leave this reality and enter that reality.
I mean, at the neglect. I was making a point. At the
Yeah.
neglect of your own body. is
No, but I
unhealthy
think that's
lifestyle.
to further my point that it is just reality. That you can't. They're not like it's not outside of this reality in a new reality. It is just part of reality. That is. I don't know. It's maybe
Sure,
more.
it's in this one, but not everyone's in it.
I think maybe it's more of a story. It's on the spectrum of reality to story. It's leaning towards story in that it has more clearly stated rules in that it runs on code.
right.
Yeah, the rules are definitely more
Okay.
clearly stated than
I'm-
our reality.
I think maybe what even led me here to this silly little dichotomy, and I think it might be useful, is just that like I think that might be a fundamentally the difference between the way different sorts of people solve problems, because some people really are people who are like not. Usually, if you're a good listener, you're more inclined to be willing to take in a whole bunch of details and kind of let the game be really, really big. If you're a thinker, if you're somebody who likes to win games, you're somebody who wants to kind of distill everything down to the rules as quickly as possible so you can solve a situation. But the other type of person is somebody who's a lot more not quite as focused on the solution. So I guess the progress thing can't even be their commonality because, yeah, like some people, it's like you get to a solution, you get to a better destination somehow just by feeling it together. I don't know. But yeah, it's like there's two ways of solving problems. One is like clearly defining the rules and then working from there and solving it. And sometimes a problem is for some reason solved just by like feeling it together. And I don't know why that is. I know that there's definitely a preference between different sorts of people between solving problems in those different ways. And that seems to me to be a good kind of cut down the middle of like those are two common strategies and they're very different. There's the story and there's the game.
Well,
Good.
yeah, they're two strategies or tools which are necessary at different times, because it sounds like you're talking about the circumstance where someone is explaining a problem they have and they want a certain response from another person.
Yeah.
So you can try to solve their problem, or you can just feel the problem with them, depending on what they want.
And I maybe just being somebody who likes to play games more, I want to try and understand why is it that just feeling a problem makes it better.
Well, what's
Because in that case, the goal that you're defining as the listener is that there's a problem that needs to be solved, but the speaker is defining the problem as I have frustration from something I've experienced, but I don't care to change the world.
Yeah, the disconnect you're seeing is a non-explicit goal. So you're just not aligning. So in game, why you like games is because the goals are explicitly stated. The problem with stories is the goals aren't explicitly stated. And so that's why they can be just felt. You don't really need to do anything. They can just be heard.
Just telling the story, sometimes you get to the end.
Well, the end of the story. And I guess if the goal of the story is to conclude itself, then it's a game, and you win.
Yeah, you can speedrun that shit.
Is the Lord of the Rings?
It's like a universe.
Story?
It's the Lord of the Rings is a story.
Well, like it does have a clear end, but his
but it
goal
doesn't.
But it doesn't have a clear
there.
goal.
His goal wasn't to get to the end of
Well,
the
the
story.
characters have goals.
Right.
And characters seem to have goals, but they don't always pursue the goals that you thought they had. Or sometimes a twist is that they were pursuing another goal that you didn't see. And I think that's a fun thing to simulate in reality, because you are not always aware of everyone's, goals. And that's why sort of games are fun, because all of a sudden you're hyper, because in some cases you are aware of everyone's goals and you're just straight up competing for them. And that's also a fun thing to simulate.
Okay. Well, the way that you end a conversation is you figure out when you're not interested in having it anymore. That's the key mode I'm having right now. I can't grasp this. I think we've crossed the critical
interest.
point.
I think for a lot of us, it's the ability to maintain attention any longer.
I think we got to a very interesting topic late in the conversation.
Yeah, you just breached something new, and I'm like, shit, I want to talk about this now, but I was done 2 minutes ago.
I hate how that happens. I've literally already had
it's perfect. Because now you gotta.
That's the way of actually having a good ending to a conversation, because then you want to come back for more, but you're like, you understand this is the end, but this is not the end.
Yeah, I'll have to listen to this back when I have more mental fortitude, because I'm gone.
Yeah. Well,
wait a second. They said
that's
things?
The other thing is that Evan and I figured out. So I wanted to also just discuss some basic format shit, and we figured out that I want to do 0.5 episodes. We recorded one yesterday. Want to do sometimes you have a conversation and you get to the end and there's more you need to process and you want to come back to it, but it's not like you need to necessarily come back and have a full conversation. You just need to wrap up some loose ends.
Sure.
After show.
Especially
I had that thought, if you were talking to someone and you don't necessarily, have that much to contribute yourself, or not even that. It's that when I listen to your conversation without me, I was like, I have things that I want to say. And then if you're talking to someone, we're all going to want to talk about it. So we're going to have a 0.5.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm down to if you guys want to come over and do some 0.5 episodes. I was just doing it with Evan because he's handy all the time, and sometimes I just have ideas I want to flesh out with him. But if you guys want to come over and do some 0.5 episodes, I love
0.5.
Yeah, 0.5 sounds good.
Especially because I mean, I hope to have some guests that their time would be limited because they're busy and interesting enough. Yeah, they're good guests if their time's limited. That just means that we might talk about some stuff that
guys,
is
I have
good.
to go. Actually, I have another thing.
Yeah, this is a good guest.
Don't want to toot my own horn, but I do have something after
literally
this.
what dictates
He
it
had
on Joe
something else
Rogan.
planned
Though.
today?
It's like, whoa, 2-hour interview.
Yeah.
Must be a good guest.
It's 10 o'clock at night. I've got to go do something else.
Well, so sometimes I've already run into a couple situations like that, and it's like, gotta keep talking about that because there's more there. Got it. So we'll do that, and that's it's nice to end a conversation on a point where it's like that. I still got that conversation has to continue in here, and then later on, when that conversation is distilled down to something that's more interesting, I'll let somebody take the mic and share the conversation I had inside my head, and we'll have another good conversation outside here in a real room. But until then, I think that's the end of the inaugural episode of This Could Be Interesting. I hope it was interesting. Don't know if it was, but I hope so.
Oh, you're supposed to say that at the beginning.
Oh yeah, true.
Well, this could have
At
been
the end, you gotta
interesting.
say,
This
well,
could
this
have been
was
interesting.
How do you have?
Well, that was interesting. If you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to subscribe, like the video. Any kind of engagement really helps out with algorithm stuff as far as I'm aware. Another thing I'd love if you would do would be to share this video with someone who you think might find it interesting or specifically might disagree with it about something or disagree with you about something, and use it as a launch pad to have an interesting conversation, have an interesting disagreement maybe, because that's really what this whole thing is about for me. I think that having, honest disagreements is a really useful and meaningful thing to do. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.